Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to United in Strengths. And this is your community around building character strengths within yourself and with the people around you. And just to remind you of the key taglines that we've had from the beginning with this experience, which is to remember to breathe, so to pause throughout our day and catch our breath when we're in the midst of stress or distractions or discomfort. Secondly, it's to remember our strengths. And it can be always surprising to us, as you all have been talking about with courage and bravery. It can always be surprising to us to remind ourselves that we have these 24 ingredients to turn to through the difficulties of our life, whatever the difficulties will be, because they will certainly be there. And then third, this is our place to connect deeper with yourself for sure, but also to connect more deeply with other people. And hopefully this serves as a microcosm for you to connect more widely into your families and your communities in the world. So those are our three words: breathe, strengths, remember your strengths, and connect. And so today I was thinking of sharing a little bit about social mindfulness. And sort of kind of a different way than we traditionally think about mindfulness or meditation. So really to start off with a question for us to sort of reflect on, which is, why is mindfulness meditation something that's almost always a solitary activity? I don't know if you've ever thought about that before, but where we sit and we follow our breathing, we follow certain instructions from a meditation teacher or from a video or from a YouTube experience of some kind. And it's usually quite solitary. Then some of us might take it a step further and we're part of a meditation group. Maybe it's part of a church community. Maybe it's part of a Buddhist meditation community. Maybe it's a secular spiritual community of some kind. And so it's taking a little bit further, but still, it's a solitary activity. We're practicing with our breathing, bringing mindfulness to ourselves, becoming more aware of what's going on in us and around us, even though even in those situations, there might be other people around us doing the same thing. So, why is that? Why is it that we haven't moved very far into social mindfulness, where we're really attending more to relationship and mindfulness of relationships and those people around us? So I think the approaches of the solitary approach of meditation there's great purposes to that. We need that sense of focusing and that cultivation of our mind, and that's what the concentration element of mindfulness does. When we're practicing following our breathing, repeatedly bringing our attention back to our breath or back to a single point, we're cultivating our mind. We're training our mind. We're literally changing the brain structure, research finds in neuroscience, changing the brain structure of our mind in very productive ways. But that's not to say that there's not other ways to bring about mindfulness. And so that's our topic here, is seeing about making it perhaps a bit more social. So still appreciating our regular approach, our solitary approach, keep doing that, but maybe we have some opportunity to expand it. So, and some people, by the way, on this topic, there are other people that have talked about this before. If we are ever going to sort of transform society through mindfulness, I know there's many ways to transform society, but if mindfulness is one of those ways, then we must make it more social. We must take these kind of inner workings that we're having with focusing and be able to bring it to our focus on other people and to help improve other people as well. So to really have that transformation, we must, at least in part, bring some of this work that we're doing in a more social way. So I began to think about this, and so it's certainly not fleshed out and all the pieces and parts aren't properly named, but think about this sort of on a continuum of on one side of a continuum that doesn't really have an end point on either side. It's just gradations, kind of like the character strengths, are always thought about in degrees. We can have more or less curiosity, more or less bravery, more or less gratitude, more or less spirituality, rather than we just have it or we don't. It's not a diagnosis. So the same thing here with mindfulness being more social. It's not just like, yep, I do it. It's yes or no. but instead it's all in degrees and gradations. So we can then look at this on a continuum of being more solitary mindfulness, which is, by the way, still good, and then more and more and more and more social. And so we'll give some examples of some of those really far end continuum of social mindfulness. So we have the mindfulness that I was talking about just tuning into our breathing by ourselves. Then we have mindfulness that's still focused on ourselves, but maybe with a group of other people doing the same thing. Then we keep going along the continuum a little bit further. Then maybe we get to a point where we're practicing mindfulness meditation or some kind of meditation practice on a retreat. So it's a prolonged social experience in the context of meditation or the context of mindfulness, but it's still mostly solitary in that sense. We're still trying to focus on ourselves and growing ourselves. And then we can move into a more, what I was kind of thinking of as sort of a soft social mindfulness, where we are being more attentive to what's going on around us and how that's impacting us. And so I want to give you an example of that emerged for me on Sunday. So yesterday, actually, I was participating in the meditation community that I'm part of. And the way that the meditation groups have been going in this online world is first as a group, and there's about 16 people there. So as a group, we can see each other all on Zoom. We first practice for about 20 minutes of just mindful breathing. So that's that kind of cultivating that part of our mind to become more focused, to become a better observer of ourselves, to become a better observer of our thoughts as they're happening, an observer of our feelings, an observer of our body, and so on. So that's that first 20 minutes, very traditional type of meditation in that sense, mindfulness meditation. And then after about 20, 30 minutes, then we moved into a meditative reading. This reading happened to be on meditation on thought formations in our mind. So one person did the reading, and then we listened to the reading, however any of us wanted to listen. And then the third part was we then shared our experiences with one another. And so I'm telling you this to share what happened for me. So I, as a good student, always trying my best, I was doing the regular meditation in the beginning, and fairly similar. The mind wanders a lot. We go off into autopilot mind. We're thinking about other things. We're planning some things. We go to the past, and so on. And you just keep bringing your attention back. That's the art of mindfulness. But then I wanted to carry that through the rest of the hour-and-a-half experience. And so when the meditative reading came about, I still had my eyes closed and practiced following my breathing, allowing the words to flow through and to attend to them, but still staying rooted in the present moment. Not getting too carried off into thoughts of, oh, now I'm thinking about this from the reading, or this idea, or that idea, or this memory, that memory. And then we moved into the discussion point, and everybody took turns sharing for a couple minutes their experiences. And so for that also, I didn't open my eyes and kind of watch everybody's body language and their smiles or non-smiles and interacting and kind of getting lost into thoughts about that person or their appearance or what's in their background. Instead, I just kept my eyes closed, and I just followed my breathing and just allowed their words to sort of flow through my mind. And I would notice when my mind gets carried off into, oh, I'm thinking about this, or this person's triggering something in me, and I'm feeling a little small form of frustration right now. Or now I'm feeling a little bit of joy. I like hearing that person's voice, or whatever it might be. The key was to observe my experience throughout all of that. And of course, I did it imperfectly, but to keep coming back to the breath, coming back to observing what's being triggered in me when this person's talking. It might be a positive trigger. It might be a negative trigger. It might be fairly neutral. Is there a memory being triggered? Is there a future idea and some creativity being triggered? Is it my curiosity? Is it that I'm irritated by this person and that's being triggered? Is my ego getting involved and I feel a need to try to one-up the person in some way? So I'm just observing in as pure of a way as I can what's going on naturally in me. And of course, we do this with a sense of curiosity and non-judgmental approach when we're observing ourselves, because it's so easy to start to beat ourselves up and criticize ourselves and so on. that was my approach to the hour-and-a-half experience. And I have to say, and my whole point in saying that whole story is that last part was very profound. It was a very powerful experience. The other two experiences, just the solitary feeling my breathing, listening to listening to the text, all great. But to really be there and to watch my inner experience, to have all these stimuli, this person's voice, this person that I know, this person that I don't know, and hearing what they're saying and just watching as I breathe, watching what's being triggered, what's not, and then what carries me away from the present moment for a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and I didn't even know I was gone, right? That's what happens with our wandering mind. We don't even know that we're gone. That's the whole point of mindfulness, is to realize that we're gone most of the time. We keep coming back. So it's fascinating to do that. So that, I would say, on this continuum of social mindfulness is more toward the social. Now, it's still a little bit passive because it wasn't an interaction back and forth. It was me just listening, but a little bit further, challenging myself in terms of the social mindfulness piece. And then we could keep going further along the way. So a further example down the way of social mindfulness might be what we do in MBSP. You've heard us mention mindfulness-based strengths practice several times throughout these months, and we have our next MBSP course starting at the end of August, last week of August, as I think most of you know, that you can sign up for online if you like. But one of the things we do in MBSP in each session is what we call the virtue circle. Some people that lead MBSP in other countries call it an appreciative circle or a strength circle, but it's a practice of mindful listening and speaking and strength spotting in a group. And we can do this whether you're live with one another, or you can do it whether you're online kind of remotely. And so that experience is about practicing mindful listening and mindful speaking, which means that when you're speaking in a mindful way, you try the best you can to be concise, to be speaking from the heart, to be speaking honestly, what's true for you, and not going on too many tangents and so on. And then when you're mindful listening, you're doing the best you can to really be here now. As the famous meditation teacher Ram Dass often said, to just be here now with the listening, rather than thinking about what you're going to say next, which is what most of us do most of the time. And so that mindful listening and mindful speaking then becomes a more of a social mindfulness. Now, in the MBSP groups, we don't do a whole lot of crosstalk, where it's like, okay, you say something, then I say something, responding back to you, and we just keep going back and forth, like you might if you're dialoguing with your boyfriend, girlfriend, or your spouse, or your best friend, or something. So it's not a pure back and forth social in that sense, but again, plotting along that social continuum, it's getting a little bit further and further toward, or it's getting more and more social in that sense. And then we can come to sort of a far along on the social mindfulness continuum, where we challenge ourselves, speaking of bravery, to be super brave to do this, where we sit down with somebody one-on-one and we socially connect with them with mindfulness. And so this might be where we share something vulnerable, a point of suffering, a point of struggle that we're having, and the other person's job is to just listen and be present, and you sort of take turns back and forth like that. So there can be this crosstalk and that intimacy, and this has been done in workshops and encounter groups and so on for decades, this kind of thing. But I recall, this was maybe now 4 years ago, when I was co-leading some workshops for some distinguished rabbis in the United States, and I got a chance to be paired with this rabbi who's, I won't mention his name, but is a best-selling author, very prolific guy, one of these kind of ultimate wisdom type figures. And I was paired with him, and there was another rabbi that was sort of leading these dyad experiences, and our task was to get about this close to one another. So, what is that? Maybe a foot different, a foot apart from one another's face, looking each other compassionately in one's eyes, and to share a struggle, a difficulty of some kind, something that's triggering for you with the other person. And each take turns. You take about 5 minutes for each side. So you can just imagine, just as I've described that, just how intimate that is, and the immediate connectivity, and also the immediate emotions that come up, and the urge to maybe turn our head away from the person, or to feel that discomfort, to awkwardly smile. All these things are kind of going up within us that we can, of course, be aware of and notice what's going on. So I had a chance to do that back and forth. The experience was very powerful and very much a sense of connecting with the other person. And so I then wonder about us applying that kind of thing in our own, where if you, somebody in your life, so somebody that's a friend or a spouse, a neighbor, and you each take turns, a few minutes each, and the person who's listening's job is not to give wise advice or to interpret anything. It's simply to just say, I hear you. I see your struggle. I'm present to you. I'm present with you. Imagine doing that. Best bet might be a best friend that's very understanding and connected to you, or because it might be awkward for some of you with and for me to some degree with a spouse, but for others it would be a perfect fit for you and your spouse, or maybe you might consider it with one of your children. But ask yourself, if you can't do that, or if you won't do that, if you refuse, then can you do some kind of variation of it? So maybe something that's maybe not as intimate, but some way where each of you is having the opportunity to connect and to share with one another. And the other person, the listeners, holding a space of non-judgment. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is listen, which is a big thing. They can shut down the interpreting parts of their mind and just listen and connect. So perhaps, we can each find our own variation for how to do that in our own life, because each person's life and family and who you're intimate with and connecting with is different for all of us. I'm going to spell that out in a very 1, 2, 3 way in a moment, but I want to mention one other sort of practical application. So that's one practical application, to do some variation of that in our own life, and to just observe what happens, to observe our tendency to reject these kinds of more intimate experiences, and to reflect on what that says about us, and what does that mean for us to be vulnerable and to challenge ourselves, or to refuse to be vulnerable, and so on. So then the other practical thing, way of applying this, is related to what we've talked about several times in the last month, related to what's going on in the world. So around racism, around anti-racism. So how might this social mindfulness, how might it relate to your attempts to be more wise when it comes to race, or to be more of an anti-racist? Or if we frame that in character strength language, how might you use some approach like this with social mindfulness to see the uniqueness of each person? And of course, when Ruth or I say see the uniqueness, that's code for character strengths. So when you see the character strengths of the other person, regardless of the color of their skin, the race, their background, their religious, sexual orientation, religion, country of origin, political affiliation, and so on. So how might this social mindfulness help you to see that uniqueness? Might you seek out people who are different from you in some way to practice this one-on-one social mindfulness with? That would be the next bravery challenge, if you will. You can just kind of imagine and let your mind go on that one of where the impact of that might be for you, for others. And then a much lighter practical application would be to do what I did, or something similar to it when I was with my meditation community, when there's a bunch of other voices kind of coming at you, and then you just stay present, perhaps eyes closed to cut out that extra distraction, and just follow their words, listen to their words, but see how it's affecting you, to see what's going on in you with each sentence, and see if you can stay grounded and centered as best you can. And then when you're not grounded and centered, you come back to the mindfulness, which helps you be grounded and centered. And you could do that kind of approach in a shopping mall when those are open again in your city or country, where there's lots of people around, there's lots of busyness, there's lots of people talking. Maybe you can do it in other groups that you're part of. Maybe you can do it at a work meeting if it's appropriate to close your eyes. Of course, you could do it with your eyes open. Or maybe you're doing it right now. Maybe you'll do it in the last parts of this United in Strength session when we're hearing from the feedback from several of you. Maybe you'll practice with your eyes closed and just seeing what happens when you really try to tune in. I do wonder with that kind of approach if there is a sort of a prerequisite of mindfulness. A prerequisite, by that I mean a prerequisite of having practiced with mindfulness and having, and I don't mean this condescending at all, but knowing what I mean when I say mindful of your thoughts. Because somebody that's brand new to mindfulness and meditation might not know that. And oftentimes, because of the simple reality that almost all human beings on this planet have very intense mind wandering going on, and we don't know when the mind has gone off so much of the time. And I'm pointing the finger at me too. The mind wandering is so pervasive and so significant. So it just feels as if it's just our general operating procedure, and we don't realize that it's these mental formations or mental events that are happening in our consciousness. So that's what I'm saying. So it might be that there's a prerequisite to have, before doing these activities, that you do some level of meditation practice or mindfulness practice, so you get the idea of what it's like to be present to body sensations and to not get wrapped up and so upset by them, or to be mindful of feelings and to feel them and to breathe with them, or the hardest of all, to be mindful of the abstract nature of our mind and the craftiness of our mind and how tricky it is, how it goes off in so many clever ways, no matter how hard you're trying, and so subtly and so hazy-like that it can be so difficult to even detect. Because that's what's so interesting, at least what I found with the group. That's what's so interesting, is what's happening. Where's my mind going with this person and that person? So we have to have some kind of mindfulness of thoughts practice or training or idea of that. And so that's easy enough to do. Just start to practice meditation. Listen to any number of YouTube videos or meditation teachers and so on that topic, and then you can move on to the social mindfulness, perhaps. So to conclude, instead of, I'm going to kind of break tradition. I think in every single time I've led this, I've always led a meditation of some kind. So I think this time instead, I'm just going to try to very closely describe a social meditation, just because I was thinking Ruth and I could do this back and forth socially, but there is such an artificial thing going on with our computer screens and that I think I'll just describe it to you, and it'll save some time too, so that we can hear from all of you. And perhaps during the sharing, you can practice it if you like. It'll be a little variation of what I'm about to say, because what I'm about to say is you pick somebody close to you. So what I would suggest then for the homework, if you don't like some of the other ideas I've shared so far, then maybe you might like this one. And that is to pick a loved one that you find to be open to experimenting. somebody, who's, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a child, a neighbor, an aunt or an uncle, somebody who's pretty open-minded, maybe curious to try something different with you. And to explain to them that you'd like to practice mindful listening and mindful speaking with them in a very structured way. And that the intention of the experience is to be present to the other person, to just listen. And so that can just relieve so much anxiety. The intention isn't to give advice. There's no huge goal at the end, magic goal that we get to. It's just to be present. It's the process. It's the journey rather than the final destination. So that's what you could explain to them. And that you could say to them that really you're looking to just do 3 steps with them, that it'll take either 6 minutes or 15 minutes of time. So step 1 is person A, which might be the other person, your person B. Person A shares for 2 minutes or 5 minutes about whatever they want about their day. A stressor, a wonderful thing that happened, how the day was boring, whatever it is. And during that first step, your job is to just be there and to just listen, to not think at all about what you would say, and do the best you can to not do all these things that we do to try to feel more comfortable, like, yeah, okay, good, oh, that's great, that's funny, okay, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, to try to get rid of all the social niceties and that. There's always a time for that. Those are good things. Those are socially intelligent things to do. But in this exercise, just let that go as best you can. Be pure, and just listen. If you choose to do 2 minutes or 5 minutes. And what are they doing? Again, they're just sharing whatever they want to share. And by the way, very important to time it. It's a crucial thing. I'll say more about that in a moment. But have a timer, 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever they've agreed to, and you just listen. Timer goes off, they stop. We don't give extra time for this exercise, at least. There's no bonus time. There's no finishing the story. You could do that later when the exercise is done, but you stop. And you can tell them all that. That's the rule. Then step 2 is then it's your turn, person B. So you share for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever they had. Again, we're using the strength of fairness here. Everyone gets the same exact amount of time. And then their job, whether they're trained in mindfulness or not, is just to listen. Again, no comments, no social niceties. They just listen. You share for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. So then you're doing mindful speech. They're doing mindful listening. Then step 3 is, again, another 2 minutes or 5 minutes to debrief the experience. And that's where you crosstalk. And that's just where you say what that was like for you. That could be the only guiding question. What was that like for you, to be the listener or the speaker? And then you just kind of go back and forth. And probably naturally, you will already start to be ingrained to be a mindful listener when they're talking. And you might already start to be a little bit more ingrained to be a mindful speaker when you're speaking. That might have already happened just within those few minutes of practicing. So it's those 3 steps, 6 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever you like. The timer, again, very important because that helps people to builds up a greater sense of motivation. It encourages that sense of fairness rather than allowing people the extra time. It kind of just gives a nice structure to it. So that's what I would invite you to play around with this time. And so maybe I'll pause there, Ruth, and we could see if and then again, everyone can engage in just kind of mindful listening as we listen to other people's voices pop in here.